The first of the 5 steps of crisis management, when we have a little bit of lead time, is to be able to assess the situation. Now remember Murphy's Law, the person who's most likely on the front line is probably a person who's only been with you for a short period of time, and they're going to have to follow some set steps and procedures that you identify for them. And that's what our little template of the 1 to 5 is all about. So they're going to need to use that table that you've identified that says, what's the event? How big an impact could this have on me, and who do I need to contact? We recommend that in all situations, regardless of the severity, that you identify one key contact who essentially plays that crisis management role and one alternative, regardless of whether it's a minor incident like a trip or a fall, right the way up to we've heard there is going to be a tsunami, cyclone or major fire. That one person then plays the top of the contact tree, and they decide how far down your contact tree reaches, whether they involve everybody or just some people. But your staff, remembering that volunteer who's standing on the front line, needs to be able to see the phone number, call the number. If they don't get an answer, call the alternative number and know that they've done just what you want from your business. So we're going to work through that little template right now. So your contact hierarchy may look like an organisational chart. It may look like a bit of a spider web, but ideally it has some sort of hierarchy about it. What that does is we know who to start with, who they're contacting, and then how that information gets down to the people who need it, and how it finds its way back up to the top. So on that page of your contact hierarchy, it's best to do this with a pen, I find, rather than trying to do it on the computer first of all. Take the time to start drawing out your contact hierarchy. But first, the decision to be made is, in your crisis event, when you have some level of warning or you've heard that it is happening, who's the first person that needs to be contacted? Who is the first cab off the rank? We call them the Ghostbuster. You know that old 80s movie, Who You Gonna Call? That's the question I want you to answer now. Who does your staff, frontline or management, call once they have been advised that there is a crisis event or potential crisis affecting your business? Who is the top of your tree? So ideally, you would have one main and one alternative person for most crisis situations, whether it be an incident or a major disaster. In your situation where you've got the two most important people, you need to have that decision now as to who the alternative is going to be. If both of those people are out, who is it? Who is going to play that key role? And I told that little story before about the surfers on the Gold Coast. The decision they had to come to was, we've got a mate who runs a similar business in Sydney, actually in Melbourne, out on the Great Ocean Road. We'll call him and ask if he would step into our business if, in the unlikely event that both of us were affected, one of us had to go to hospital and the other one was going with it. Who is our third party? Our business is in a similar situation. While we might have 20 staff, there is a very small number of senior managers, and we've had to identify a third party outside of our business who could step in the situation that the executive team were unavailable. Whether it's unavailable or not able to respond for one reason or another. So this is exactly the time that you need to identify that person, most likely, and who's the alternative. I'll tell a little story which is a little bit heartbreaking, but it's one that I heard from work we've just done in the Northern Territory. A family who run a little caravan park and accommodation property in a cattle station south of Tennant Creek had a situation where there was an arsenic scare. So the health department, rightly so, shut the property down at 1 o'clock in the morning and did a full evacuation. The two owners of that property were not in town at the time. Why? Because they were in Perth dealing with a son who was only days away from dying from leukaemia. The unfortunate event that occurred was that the media made an unfortunate connection between those two events and ran a story linking arsenic in the water to their son's situation in Perth. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. That couple lost their son 3 days later, and they simply said, we're not interested in what's happening over there in the Northern Territory. We're in Perth with our family and with our son, and we're dealing with the grief of this situation. A few days later, they started to re-enter the world and started to ask the questions, where's our business at? What are we going to return to? They had delegated authority to a person who was living on site He did the best job he could do in that situation, but he just wasn't armed with the right information or the right skills or the right authority to deal with that situation. So what it meant was the time it took to recover was enormous, and the amount of money they've needed to spend is almost beyond their capability. Now, that's a very emotional story, but it's a very real story. They needed to be able to identify somebody outside of their business to step in. He did the best job he could do, but on reflection, they would have done it differently. They would have made sure that whoever was going to step in knew just what was expected of them, and that's what I want you to do today. Know just what's expected of them. We talk about media in a lot of ways like we guard ourselves from them. We're trying desperately to make sure that a bad news story doesn't get out. What I want to train you about today is how to make use of that situation and get your best foot forward, because it might be the only opportunity you get to tell your story in your terms. So we want to make the most of that media opportunity, not to try and close down that media avenue. And to do that, you need somebody who's well trained and skilled and has the right messages in advance. So hopefully you've identified that ghost bust, and what I want you to do now is have a look at our little template. So for those of you that have got the hard copy, that's the first 2 pages, page 3 and page 4. You'll see that there's a space there under step 3, communicate, to identify the name and phone number and the alternative name and phone number for the person you've identified as the most likely to manage a crisis situation. The person you want, that frontline employee or that volunteer, to pick up the phone and call in a crisis situation. So if you don't already have something like this in your business that explains to your staff what you need them to do in a crisis, this is the template that you could use. If you have your own, then continue to use your own. But I'd like you all now to identify, put the name of the person and their phone number into that space, either in the hard copy or in your electronic version, to make sure that we've got them. Once you've done that, we'll take a little look at the checklist that's on the back. So once you've got those numbers in there, flip over the page and have a look at the crisis checklist. Now, we've put in some pre-filled information, things that mean something to us. This is your template. You can put in there anything that you like. So it is there for your use. Remember that you're asking your staff member to take this straight off the wall, call the phone number on the front, and then follow the steps in here. So follow this checklist and make sure that they've done it. So if there are specific things that need to be done for your business, make sure that they understand what they are as part of the induction that you do for every staff member coming to your organisation, and that those things are relevant to you. So what your staff member will do, will take this off the wall, they'll assess the situation, they'll make a call. They'll need to make some sort of call. Do I need to provide some emergency response, first aid, marking off the area around it? Do I need to make the call immediately? And do I need to evacuate immediately? And do I know the evacuation procedure and the locations? Only once you know that everyone is safe and we're not putting anyone else's life at risk do we pick up the phone and start making any phone calls. So we assess the situation, we undertake immediate emergency response, and then we start the communication tree. Realising that it could be a life-threatening situation that your customer or staff member is facing. They're going to be under an enormous amount of stress, and they need to be able to just know that they're following a process and they're doing exactly what you'd expect of them. That's what this little checklist is for. Once they've made that communication, they've calmed the situation, they're in control of the environment, we hope that they would take a moment to flick over the page and just make sure that they have done the things that are on here, whether they physically check it off or mentally check it off. Work through that crisis checklist to know that they've done what you expect from them in a crisis situation. So work through that process now. Cross out anything that's not relevant. For those of you using your computers, simply change the words, make sure they're relevant to you, and know that a frontline staff member would be doing what you expect if they work through that immediate checklist. Now, they're not covering off everything. Lots of other people are going to be involved in your crisis response, but if it is something that needs to be decided right there and on the spot, that you provide them with as much guidance as you can give them so that they have the headspace to make the right decision. So what I'll ask you to do from here, if you haven't already finished, take it back with your business, have a little bit more of a think about it, but do, please, if you haven't already got a form like this within your first aid kit or accessible to your frontline staff or somebody who represents your business out on the front line, do make sure that you do it. Print it, laminate it, get it out there. Continue to work through it with your crisis team over time, but take action today, because it's just as likely old Murphy's Law would say that this event will happen tomorrow, and you'll say, if only I'd done what Mark had said and just put it out there, even though it wasn't 100% perfect. We agreed on it, we're comfortable with it, and we put it in the market. Make sure that your staff are aware of it. Don't just put it out there and hope that they notice it. Let them know that it's there. You want them to use it, and that's the process that you go through. Okay. So in terms of the emergency response, most of us are great about keeping our staff up to date with first aid. You know your evacuation procedures. What I want you to do is make sure that you have a few other things in responding to an emergency. Now, this is footage provided to us by Queensland Police, and I don't do it to be opportunistic. I do it because it's important that you realise how quickly an event like this could come up on you. This is flooding in the Lockyer Valley. You'll see from the photograph, keep an eye on this little watershed here, this little water tank, which is next to a small property. The water is beginning to come up into the field, flowing on from this little river here. In 11 minutes, the water tank is gone and the property needed to be fully evacuated. 11 minutes after that first photograph was taken. In 18 minutes, the property is completely consumed, and in 22 minutes, there is a kilometre of water across the property. So we always talk about having lots of time, having time to make good decisions. 22 minutes could be all you have to get everything you need out of your business, the people that you need to be contacting, told, and anyone who is within that vicinity to be made well aware that you do not want them coming anywhere near you. This is not the time for it. 22 minutes could be all that you have. So in thinking about that, I want you to do one thing for me today, and that is create a little thing we call the Go Pack. So a Go Pack is what you take with you if you have very little time to get out of your business, but it has all the things that you need. Quick show of hands already has something like that. A little kit, take, run and go, okay? For those of you who already have one, you should have one for your house and you should have one for your property, because you won't always have the time that you need. My wife and I often laugh about the story when our neighbour's kitchen caught on fire early in the morning, and she said to me, quick, grab the computer. I said, what? The computer? Why? She said, it's got all the photographs of the kids on it. I'm like, we have 2 kids. How about you get one and I get one, and we can take as many photos of those kids for the rest of their lives? How about that? She's like, no, I'll get the 2 kids. How? I don't know. 2-year-old, 6-month-old, and you get the computer. So from that point on, we agreed. Portable hard drive was purchased that very next day. I do have responsibility for grabbing that, plus the big one. She gets the little one and her wedding ring, and we're out of our house. So we've set up a little Go Pack with a few little things in it. But I'll give you a tip on some things that you might want to have in a Go Pack for your business. So there's a little template in your business continuity plan. It's on page 7. If you haven't already got one, start to jot down at least 4 or 5 things that you will go back to your business and put into a Go Pack today. Not tomorrow or the day after. Just make sure you've got them in your business today if you only have 22 minutes in which you need to get out of your property. And that could be something like the template you did today. It might be your list of employees, visitors or customers, suppliers details, details of your insurer, your insurance policy, key contacts within your organisation. Jason talked before about the cloud, being able to access your data. Not all of us use the cloud, so where's my business details? Where are my accounts? Where are my forwards? A first aid register or a first aid kit, an event log, some computer backups, spare keys, mobile phone, all of these things you might need in the event of an emergency. So while you're writing down the 4 or 5 things you're going to put into your kit when you get home, I'll tell you a little story about a Tourism Queensland employee going through Cyclone Louis. She's up in Airlie Beach. She got clever. She identified that after the cyclone, she would spend most of her time on the telephone. Her mobile phone would probably be the only thing that worked, and she knows she gets about a day's charge out of it. So she bought herself a car charger. She put a car full of petrol and she put some extra petrol in the garage, and she realised that if she was going to be running the car to charge the phone, she'd need to be able to get the garage up, and it's one of those electric automated ones, so she had to get somebody around to show her how to override the thing to get the garage door up so that she could run the car, make the phone calls and keep the business of Tourism Queensland in the region running. That's a very clever lady. who did exactly what you need to do in a crisis situation. She knew just what she needed, and she'd thought through what it's actually going to be like in that situation. Brian raised some really important points. You need to be prepared for at least 2 to 3 days of all the food and water and supplies that you'll need for the people that you're responsible for. It's not just yourselves, it's also all the people that could be in your accommodation or who might be staying with you as part of an emergency accommodation situation. So thinking that through, 10 litres of water per person per day, and you're going to need food for those people and some basic supplies. And if you're in a hospitality environment, honestly, what will you be doing with them if the electricity is out? How will you keep those people entertained? Who's got the juggling and guitar skills? That'll be just what you need to create an entertaining environment for those people while they're with you. So the Go Pack has got to have a number of things in it. The other story we learnt from Cyclone Larry and Louis and from Yasi is ATMs are there, but there's not much money coming out of them. So do I have cash, and how can I access that? So your Go Pack might just have a little bit of spending money for things like petrol or some basic supplies, and know that in advance, if it is something like a flood or a cyclone, then everyone is going to be rushing around at the last minute trying to get their supplies. So where are you going to get yours from, and how much do you need? You don't want to be making that decision on the day. So a Go Pack can be all important in getting just the right material together for your business. Get your Go Pack together, and then we start our communication process. So only after we've assessed the situation, only after we've done whatever emergency steps are required, do we start to engage with communication. You've identified who's at the top of your tree. Now I want you to work through that contact hierarchy and make sure we've identified who's doing what jobs, what roles are the people who are going to be in your team playing, so that we can speed this process up. The trap to fall into is to try and do everything yourself. And what we'll do is we'll put up a list of some typical jobs that would need to be done in a crisis situation. And you'll very quickly see that you'd overload one person by doing all of those jobs. And we've only identified a small fraction of the things that need to be done. So you need to be able to delegate responsibility. And Alan raised a really important point before. Today is the day to identify whether the people you're going to be delegating to have the capacity to do that, and whether they need more skills or more support to do that. And if they do, then today, as part of your business plan, you need to identify how that's going to happen and how you're going to skill those people up to be there for you in a crisis situation. Particularly if they're the alternative, where we often think that won't happen. Murphy's Law would say that it will happen. So let's start thinking about how we're going to get those people engaged. So your contact hierarchy is that little page that you started before. What I want you to do now is spend some time. Put your primary and alternative at the top of your tree and start working through the jobs and the people who are going to be doing those jobs. One really easy way to do that is to work through the list of people who need to be contacted. So at the bottom of your hierarchy, why don't you identify the people that you want to be contacted? Your employees, your suppliers, your insurer, your owners, your business partners. Who's going to need to be contacted? Write those along the bottom, and then work through your contact hierarchy and identify who's going to be calling those people, and then also what sort of jobs are going to be needed to be done by the people in your contact team. So who's doing media? Who's doing reporting internally? Who's contacting the suppliers? Who's contacting the staff? Who's understanding your insurance and your insurance obligations? Who's recording information for your business? So your contact hierarchy is on page 6. It's just a nice big open space. You'll have a few goes at this. You won't get it right the first time. So a bit of space for you to have a first go at a contact hierarchy, allocate the jobs, and I'll walk around now and work through with you the people who are in that team and the roles that they play.